Welcome back to the table. Today we are taking a look, and by we I mean me and Emily, at First in Flight. This is a game from Artana Games. It's also from designers Ben Rossett and Matthew O'Malley,
who did Search for Planet X.
Yeah, they're two. You really enjoy that game.
I love that game.
You've probably heard their names before. This game doesn't have much in common with that game, but it does have some cool things going on. This is a deck builder. Yes, but not a deck builder in sort of the very traditional sense of the term. But you are building a deck for sure.
Yes, and lots of cards.
You're going to end up with different decks of cards by the end of the game than the other players at the table. But probably more importantly, this is a push your luck game.
Yes.
And it's First in Flight, so it's themed around sort of the Wright brothers and other famous people and pilots that were sort of in that mix of getting aircraft up in the air, making friends that hopefully will help you and invest in what you're trying to get done. But most importantly, taking test flights, and you're going to be flipping your deck one card at a time to take those test flights and push your luck, hopefully.
Flying further and further each time, hopefully.
And landing to get the most distance possible, but also sometimes crashing.
Yes.
And sometimes
Crashes
discovering
happen.
some design flaws in your plans and maybe even addressing some of those. And it's really cool how they've done that. What you see here is all of the components, and just keep in mind this is a prototype. But these are all the components here. We've got the main board, which is going to have a couple different things. You've got this track around here, which is the action track, where you're going to move your pawns to take the various actions. Then you've got your test flight track here with all of our flyers. They're going to go around here. This is going to track the distance of
how far we're flying each time.
How far. It's not a cumulative thing that gets added to. It's just whenever you take a test flight, you want to beat your last record.
Right. And if you don't beat it, you're just going to stay where you were. So
Exactly.
really, you kind of just lose out on that turn.
Yeah, so the effective flow of the game is trying to build up that deck so that when you take your test flights, you're getting a little further.
Yeah.
Across the top of the board, you're going to see a few different stacks of cards. Right here, you have glide cards. This is the very basic type of card. It lets you go one extra distance in your flight because you're gliding. Right here is an experience card. Experience, when you play that, you're going to get one distance for the card itself, but when you play it, you're able to take another glide card and add it to your
Build
flight,
it into your deck,
which is kind of nice. It's experience after all. Here is the not so pleasant card. But not the worst one. These are the basic flight problems. Now, our deck is going to start with some of those, but when you flip those over, it's going to have one of these problem symbols.
And if you get 4 problem symbols, you crash.
Yeah.
So you immediately stop. No more points, no more flight. And also, when you crash, your person's going to need time to recover. So they're going to get flipped on their side, laid down, and you're going to have to take a next action, a next turn, to stand them back up, pay a bit of time, and recover from it.
Long story short, don't crash.
Yeah.
You don't want to crash. No one wants
Better
to crash.
not to crash.
And you get a little extra distance if you're able to not crash.
Yes.
And then over here, face down, we have acceleration cards. These are like the glide cards, but they range from 2 all the way up to 5.
5, yeah.
There's not a lot of 5s in that deck.
But they exist.
But they do exist. So some of the things you can do over the game is get some of those in your deck so that when you flip it, you're obviously going a little bit further. And then finally here we have design flaws. The design flaws are much like the basic problems, except they have 2 of those problem icons. So when you flip it, you're that much closer to crashing.
You're halfway there for your first one already.
But thematically, what's cool about it is it represents a design flaw in your design. So if you do experience that during a test flight, you're able to, and we'll get to this in a few minutes, put that on top of your deck and then potentially take another action to address that design flaw.
Yeah,
and
you basically have found it, right? And said like, oh, I see what the design flaw is. Now I can improve it to make my flight better next time.
Yeah, it really captures that thematically really well. Across the side here, we have some of the development cards as well as over here. What's that first development there?
The first one is Daredevil. So that's something that these happen during a flight, and when you do them, you can tap them to do something special. So like this one says, look at the top 4 cards of your deck, draw 1, and shuffle the rest into your deck. So if I drew my cards, one of them happens to be a problem, probably not going to take that one. One of them happens to be a 5, maybe that's the one I draw and shuffle the rest into my deck.
Yeah, those are skills, and like Emily said, those are what you use during a flight. They can be used once per flight, and then they untap for the next time you were to take a test flight. Over here, we have those friends that we were talking about. These are kind of like those, but they're used once per round.
Yes.
The game is played over 4 rounds, which is going to be dictated by that action track. Once all the players get all the way back to the beginning of the action track, the round is over. And we're going to do that 4 times, or
Or
the game might end if any one of us during a test flight gets all the way up to 36, which at the beginning of the game sounds like, wow, that's a lot.
Right.
Because your first test is going to be maybe 5, maybe 8, maybe 10.
10 if
maybe,
we're
maybe
feeling
10 if you're
good.
lucky. So that 36 seems like quite a goal.
Yes.
But you'll get there.
Yeah.
Believe it. That's how our game ended for sure. So the friends are going to help you do that a little bit too, but once per round. And then finally, you've got the technology cards. Technology cards aren't a tappable card. They're just an ongoing ability,
Effect, yep.
which is nice. And they represent, obviously, the technology that you're adding to the plane. And very thematically represent
what they
you,
actually
what you
can do for you.
All of these cards are effectively allowing you to mitigate that situation of the push your luck when you take your test flight, because you can use a lot of these cards to really kind of manipulate some of those
What's going on.
problems down to the bottom of your deck or something like that. But it makes that push your luck feel less like just complete randomness and more like something you have some control over.
Plus, you have one more thing that's helping you out. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to choose
yeah.
your own pilot card. And that will help you determine just like a little extra something. So for mine, I got to add a 3 to my flight deck to start out with, which is great because usually you just start with a bunch of 1 glides. And then anytime I had a skill, I could look at +2 cards. So for like that Daredevil one we just talked about, it said look at the top 4 cards. I was looking at the top 6 cards.
Yeah, which was huge because when she used this character, it created an engine where she went after more and more of those skill cards because, I mean, there was some where you were looking at 7 cards.
7 cards, yeah.
And some of those skills let you to just look at them and then put them back. Some of them let you look at them and put it back in whatever order.
Or some of them let me look at them and then decide which ones I didn't want, put them at the bottom of my deck.
And that was huge
Yes.
because she was able to basically get a lot of the problems down at the bottom, so she had a lot more control over her flight. Whereas I was a little more loosey-goosey.
Flying solo.
And those problems were going to come up whenever they did. But I wasn't taking big cards. I just had a lot of glides.
You did,
And I was going really sort of slow and steady.
Yeah. And who are you playing?
I was playing Wilbur and Orville Wright.
Okay,
You're probably familiar with them. The game is packed with people you're probably less
Lots of
familiar with,
variability.
but historical figures that were relevant to sort of this getting first in flight. But their ability was to gain 1 glide card, which is probably what helped
got
my
so much
strategy,
glide.
and 2 money whenever I set a new personal record. So like I said, when you take that test flight, as long as you do better than the last one, you're setting your own new personal record. Whenever that happened for me, I was able to get another glide card and some money.
Yeah.
Which was nice because there's not a lot of built-in aspects to getting those cards otherwise.
So he's really building his engine every single time, just a little bit more.
So the other thing here is the cards that we start with, and these are comprised of the cards we've already talked about. Our decks included a lot of those glides, some of the problems, some experience. But when you start the game, the first player is just simply kind of in a fashion that you might be familiar with. This is one of those games, whoever's furthest back is always going to go next.
Yep.
So someone might take their turn and go as far around this track as they want, but then they're going to be waiting a while.
A long time.
Until the other players catch up and someone can just slowly go and take all these things. So whenever you're on a space, no one else can take that space, so you're going to be jumping over people. The other spaces you're going to see here are time. Emily already alluded to this, but time is going to be spent. If you crashed, you have to spend time, and by spending time, that means effectively if I'd crashed here, I'd have to spend 2 time, which would be 1, 2, to stand back up, which is going to make me miss some opportunities here.
Yeah, for sure.
And effectively, thematically, burn time.
Yeah.
You know, so you're not going to be able to take as many actions.
You can also spend time in a couple places on the board
Yes.
too in order to be able to do things. So if you don't have enough money, you can also spend time, which isn't the way it always goes.
It is. They embrace the old saying, money is time and time is money, for sure. But like I said, we're going to move to an action, take it, then the next player, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about some of these actions that you're going to be taking.
Sure.
The first one here on the board is to upgrade.
Yes.
And this is how you get access to some of those
Those
acceleration
higher number
cards.
When you upgrade,
Oh.
so you're going to take an upgrade for as many as you spend. That's how many
Oh,
cards you
yes,
can
this
look
is
at. And you will only take 2 of them, so I can look at a bunch of them and then pick out the 5s, right? But also, there's some mitigation happening here where I'm also taking a design problem.
Yeah.
So design flaw comes with it, which is one of those bad cards. So there's a little bit more happening in my deck now, right? Now I don't just have the 4 opportunities to bust. I have a few more cards coming in that are good, but also a card that's not as good coming at the same time.
Yeah, and I want to take this opportunity to stress this too. This game is filled with situations and mechanisms that are incredibly well connected to the theme of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So in that instance, you've done something to upgrade your plane, but you've introduced a design flaw most likely. So it's going to be something you have to search for during a test flight. Really, really cool. The next one here allows you to take one of either the friend or the technology cards. Again, this is going to cost time or money. Now, on these cards, including the skills when you take these, if by chance you've actually reached 15 on the test flight track, you've become famous. You have a little bit of a reputation out there in this community, so things cost you a little bit less when you're getting
willing
these
to
cards.
make deals with you now.
Exactly. You've got friends in high places
There you
after
go.
all. This next one is to repair. Now, we've talked about taking that flight, and we'll get to that in a second because that is really the meat and potatoes of the game. But when you repair, after you've taken a test flight, if you've discovered one of those design flaws, when you sort of clean up and put your deck back on your player board, you're going to keep the design flaw face up. Because if before your next test flight, you choose to stop at the repair action, you're able to take one of the design flaws that you've revealed and then address that basically. So when you do that, you're going to spend money, again, 3 money or 2 time, in order to discard this design flaw. And when you do that, you don't get rid of it
Not entirely. There's
completely.
still some kinks to the system.
No, you put it back in a discard and then take one of those basic flight problems. So you're basically mitigating it down from a 2 problem card to a 1 problem card that you can never really get rid of.
Sure.
But also,
you get a bonus for repairing it.
Exactly.
So at the bottom of the card, it's going to give you a bonus, which is usually like equivalent to another action or taking a free tech or friend or skill. So they're pretty good, honestly.
Yeah.
It doesn't even just feel like a consolation. The reason I repair might be, honestly, just to get that repair bonus because they're pretty juicy.
Yeah, and you want to make that part of your strategy for sure. If you're going to go heavy on the upgrades and you're going to be taking a lot of those design flaws, you want to incorporate repairing those into your strategy because it's key to getting some actions. Now, the next one here is the test flight. This is the meat and potatoes of the game.
Let's fly.
When you go here, you're going to take all of the cards you have, including if you've revealed some design flaws that you haven't gotten rid of. So if you weren't able to take that repair, you add it back to your deck. You shuffle up your deck at this point, and then you place it on this side of your board, and then 1 card at a time, you just simply reveal cards below your board in a row, 1 at a time, hoping to either descend eventually, or you're maybe going to crash. Again, all of this is to try to get further than your last personal record. Now, here's how this is going to play out. We've already discussed what some of these cards do. The numbers very obviously just add to your flight trick. The experience is going to do the same, a 1, plus you get another glide. Those problems are going to be the ones you want to look out for.
Please, no more problems.
And what you're basically going to do is you're going to push your luck until you maybe have a couple problems.
And then you're like, oh, maybe it's time we stop flying
and
this
you
round.
want to descend. So everyone has a descend card sitting beside their board. You can play this at any time, but you have to have played at least 1 card first. But at that point, you can play the descend card. Now, your flight is not over.
Not yet.
No.
Still got to actually descend.
Yeah, when you descend, it basically means that you have to play 2 more cards. So if you've played 3 problem symbols up to that point, you better hope that one of those last 2 cards isn't a problem symbol or you're going to crash. So the cool thing is, though, if you do happen to land safely, that descend card is going to be worth 5 distance on that track, which is great. If you crash, the descend is still worth 2, but that's effectively the first part of the penalty for crashing, is you're going to get a little less out of that descend card. But you still, have a test flight.
And you can crash too without ever descending, right? So
For sure.
you could be like, I'm playing as hard as I can go and crash earlier without even the descent. You just won't get those bonuses from playing the descend card, but you could still even make a record by crashing. Honestly, if you just kept pushing your luck as far as you could go. Again, if you crash though, you're going to need some recover time. So you're going to have to put your person facing down and take an extra action next turn to get yourself back up again.
Yeah, and remember, this is also when you're using a lot of these cards. Now, you have to keep one thing in mind. These cards, most of them, are only usable before you've played your descend card. Once you've played your descend card, you can't rely on some of those skills or some of the equipment.
Right.
You're on your way down. But there are some interesting things. Speaking of the crash, I think there was one friend that you had at one
Yeah,
point.
that it said if you crash, you didn't have to take recover time.
Yeah,
and
you didn't have to lay down.
I think he gave me a glide too. So it
Yeah.
was almost like helpful to crash in a way, but still more points if I could descend.
But again, that was a friend, so it was only used once per round. So
Right.
if she did 2 test flights during a round, you were going to use that once, but
Yeah.
not the other time.
One crash was safe, one crash was not safe.
I had a friend that actually, because of my strategy with all the glide cards, gave me 2 glide
Yeah,
cards.
you had so many glide
during
cards.
my flight. So again, only once per round I could use them. So typically I'd go to my first test flight, wouldn't use them, knowing that if on my second one I could use them and hopefully do as well as my first test flight, but
Plus a
get
little.
2 more so that I could get a record. Again, tying back to my pilot card, whenever I got a record, I would get a little something.
Yeah.
So by the end of the game,
You had so many glide. It was
I had-
just gliding through all the skies.
and this was one of the cool things, I think. My deck was almost
Big.
as thick as a deck of cards.
Yeah.
And yours was still
Why is-
pretty
mine was
tight.
not. No,
Like,
yeah, mine was much smaller than yours.
But she had a lot more of those acceleration
right.
cards.
And I was
So-
the one who triggered the game end by getting the 36 first. So.
Yeah, we went around and around like this. So effectively, back to the structure and not our game. You go around here until everyone's gotten back here. And there are some other actions that you might encounter. There's an any space that lets you do anything you want, but you have to pay an
Pay a
extra
dollar.
coin. There's here, it's funding, it gives you $5. So if you're low on money and you need some, you might do that. This one lets you get the skill card. There's only one space on the board that lets you take another experience
Yeah,
card.
there's not a ton of them.
So that's the course of a round. You're going to do this, and then the first person in is going to be the first person to move the next round. But between rounds, there is the Michelin Award. This is going to go to whoever has the highest test flight
Yes.
record. And then there's a second place and a third place and so on. So this is just money. So this is effectively an income phase for this game, but you're getting this award. It's money that you're going to be able to spend in that second round.
Yes, and you're
the
going to need
third.
it, and you're going to want it in order to do all your actions. So you might be thinking like, well, I'll just save up and not do my big flight till later in the game. But that's not really going to help you. You'd rather
Right.
do it first, so that way you can get some of this income coming from the Michelin Cup. But it's also, again, a balance, right, of which actions are you taking and which ones are you passing on.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, too, because at first, I think when we played this, I felt like, okay, I want to keep taking test flights. But by the end of the game, I felt, you know what? Because we're each going to get a test flight at the end of the game. This goes
Yes.
on for 4 rounds, or like Emily said, until someone reaches 36. Once that happens, they finish their turn, and then everyone at the table, including them, gets one more test flight.
Yeah.
And whoever has the best test flight
Wins.
wins the game. So even if someone triggers the end game like that, everyone gets to go again. So towards the end of the game, I wasn't taking test flights. And I was just doing things to really get more glides into it.
Yeah.
And I had a gigantic flight that
Oh my
was
gosh,
just
it's
a bunch
huge.
of gliding. It was just it wasn't the most acrobatic flight.
No,
There
no.
wasn't a lot of acceleration going on, but I glided and glided and glided to a win in our game. But it was a really satisfying experience, and Emily pointed out too, even when someone else is taking their turn,
It's
in
so
a push your luck,
exciting.
it's fun. At least it was fun for us to
Yeah.
watch that. Because in some of these games, when someone's doing that, I mean, there's always some innate excitement in that because
Right.
you're either wanting them to bust or generally wanting them to bust.
Yeah.
In this game, though, it was interesting because it was just fun to watch. They built their deck differently. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, this is cool that you're getting to go as far as you are with this different strategy.
Yeah, I was
than
genuinely on your last flight, like, is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? And not in like a, please don't do it, and more of like a, this could happen. Like,
Right.
let's make it happen. And I'd be like, oh, did you use that ability? Don't forget you have that guy there too.
Yeah, so I'd pulled a couple things that just I was going to try to mitigate as much as I could with this massive deck that I had and pulled it off. And it ended up being a really interesting take on Push Your Luck. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that it makes so much sense for thematically. I mean, effectively, these people were pushing their luck.
It's exactly like watching a flight. I mean,
Right.
that sounds like an exaggeration, but it felt like, oh my God, is it still okay? Oop, there's a little hiccup there. Is he going to be okay? He's starting to descend. Oh no, he crashed.
Yeah, like you said, it does sound a little hyperbolic to say that, but it was very, very thematic in that way.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I've seen that theme tied with this push your luck mechanism as much as I did here.
Yeah.
So that is First in Flight from Artana Games. Again, if you have any questions at all, if you haven't looked at their campaign, make sure and ask those questions down below. We'll try to answer what we can. But until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.